Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome on behalf of FPR to this discussion on improving the value recognition of endpoints beyond overall survival in reimbursement decision-making for oncology drugs. My name is Verena Arnett. I'm a partner at NEK Consulting, and I have the privilege of moderating this debate today. We are excited to launch with this event a new publication on the topic of oncology-relevant endpoints. This publication was supported by a multi-stakeholder group of patient organizations, physician organizations, HTA experts, and FPR. Today's webinar will be an interactive discussion based first on questions from me to our speakers, whom I will introduce in a moment, as well as questions from the audience. If you want to ask a question, please click on the Q&A button and write your question. Could I ask you to be brief, please? Twitter length or less would be great, so I can see at a glance what you want to ask and who you want to ask it to. We probably won't get to all of the questions, but do send them across and we'll see if we can address some of them in writing after the webinar as well. If you are having IT issues and would like some help, you can use the chat button to speak to the IT wizards in the background, who are monitoring everything to ensure it goes smoothly. And then one final housekeeping notice that this webinar will be recorded. Let me now welcome and introduce our speakers. If you could come on camera, please. First one I'd like to introduce is Bettina Riehl, who is the founder of the Melanoma Patient Network Europe and was a member of the first EU Cancer Mission Board. She's a physician by training, and her patient advocacy work focuses on patient-centric innovation, covering the full spectrum from basic research to equitable access to medications. Welcome, Bettina. And then we have Ekaterini Fameli, who represents industry. She is the Global Oncology Policy Lead at GSK and the Vice Chair of the FPR Oncology Platform. Ekaterini has more than 20 years of experience in life sciences, working in the pharma industry, public health sector, and academia. She's an economist and holds a PhD in change management in healthcare. Thank you, Ekaterini. Then we have Iñaki Gutierrez. He is the head of knowledge management and evaluation at the Basque Foundation for Health Innovation and Research. He's got a number of international roles in health technology assessment. For example, was a member of the board of directors and secretary of the International Society, HCAI. And then finally, we've got Peter Albers. Welcome, Peter. Peter is a professor and chairman of the Department of Urology at the Heinrich Heine University in Düsseldorf and chair of the Scientific Congress Office, as well as board member of the European Association of Urology. So very warm welcome to all of our speakers. Thank you very much for joining us today. We will start the webinar by setting the context for our discussion, and then we'll go into the questions. These questions will be centered around three key themes. The first one is, what is the value of looking at endpoints beyond overall survival in reimbursement decision-making for oncology drugs? The second, what are the barriers to the acceptance and use of such endpoints? And then finally, which potential actions can be taken to address these barriers? In order to set the context, I would like to introduce the publication which I mentioned before on oncology-relevant endpoints, which is being launched today and which forms the basis for today's event. If we could bring the slides up, please. So this thought piece is the result of a multi-stakeholder collaboration, and you can see the stakeholders on the left who supported the publication. The objective of this thought piece is to improve the understanding, acceptance, and use of oncology-relevant endpoints in reimbursement decision-making. The endpoints that we are referring to here include overall survival, but also disease state-related endpoints such as progression-free survival or event-free survival, to name only a few. Endpoints which measure response, for example, complete response rate, and patient-reported outcomes. Next slide, please. Overall survival obviously remains a robust measure of the clinical benefit of cancer medicines due to numerous advantages such as objectivity, suitability for comparing treatment regimens, and its relevance to patients. However, we also see that reliance on OS data in regulatory and HTA decisions has some limitations. Namely, it may lead to delayed patient access to novel medicines as time to measure OS benefit increases in many treatment settings, we know that survival rates have increased significantly over the last 40 years, with 10-year survival rate across all cancers increasing from 20% in 1970 to 46% in 2014. OS is also more vulnerable to confounding than other endpoints. This is due to the increased availability of a wide range of treatment options, post-progression therapies and salvage therapies, all of which makes the detection of true OS benefit of the drug under investigation increasingly difficult, particularly in early lines. And this again may jeopardize access to therapies if benefit on OS cannot be shown. And finally, OS may also fail to reflect the full value of treatments to patients and physicians, as they may have priorities such as reduced symptoms, improved function, and lower treatment burden, which are not captured by OS. So there's a growing acknowledgement by clinicians and regulators that survival is not always the most important outcome to patients. However, uncertainties about long-term outcomes remains greater among HTA bodies and payers, and they continue to put significant weight on OS, often stating a preference for OS data. And this question on this topic provides the background for the publication which we're launching today, where we are exploring the value of endpoints beyond OS and are seeking to define actions that can be taken to address the uncertainties that I noted just now. Thank you. We can take the slide down. So with that, I would like to start with the first topic. Question, what is the value of looking at endpoints beyond overall survival in oncology reimbursement decision-making? I would like to start here with the patient perspective. Bettina, what is your perspective? Why is the topic of endpoints an important one for patients?
So, of course, as a patient, if you would like to receive a treatment that you know will work for you, and it's obviously if you're in cancer, you would like to have a treatment that extends your life in the best possible quality of life. I think that is like, and this is often how the discussion is led, so I think that's not controversial as such. The issue starts with when there is no such a treatment available, and you have to make a choice what treatment to go for example, to join a clinical study. The problem in that point is if our clinical studies are only designed to address an overall survival, basically someone is watching for you to die. And that is, of course, as a patient, is just the very point you try to avoid as much as possible. So we've had Lingo has considered reapproved, but it was not that long ago that we were at ASCO and an investigator was actually complaining that the data was not mature enough yet because not enough events had occurred, which basically translates to not enough people have died. So there is something in this time for us. Apart from that, and you have already alluded to that, is that OS, of course, is a composite endpoint. And for us, in the end, it's not about a single therapy that saves you. Of course, that would be nice. But if that's impossible, what you want is an optimized treatment structure. And you want to leave a treatment the moment it's no longer providing benefit to you. So for that, you need an actionable information, or that is what you can capture as an endpoint in a clinical trial. So for us, these what is sometimes called surrogate endpoints are actually often the clinically actionable endpoints that allow us to optimize the long-term strategy. And that's then basically playing the long game. So I think there are several points for us that is, well, we would like the information. And the point I'm always making is, in my opinion, it's not either or. It is that we need more than one endpoint is the answer to that. But that it is really about thinking, what does the insistence on overall survival mean for clinical trial design and the people who have to be on the trial? And I think I stopped there, but just like, so for us, it is really about the entire picture of a patient and how to optimize overall survival in total, not just by a single product.
Thank you. Moving over to the HTA expert, Iñaki, what's your perspective? How can better incorporation of endpoints beyond overall survival in HTA decision-making improve patient benefit assessment?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum and this discussion. Second, there was a song that I was saying, I think it was Queen, that was "Who Wants to Live Forever," and I think that that relates to one of the questions that we have here, and in principle, one of the main challenges that we face as healthcare systems. Healthcare systems need to guarantee that that we provide things that have value. On the one side, it is crystal clear that one of the challenges from the very beginning has been overall survival. So that means that we wanted to extend the length of the lives of the people that are living with us, and bearing in mind that we have those as clients of the healthcare system. But I'm in agreement with Bettina that we need to differentiate in many senses what is important to the client, and also how we can address those things. In principle, it is true that we have used overall survival probably because it is easygoing and it is much easier to measure than any other measures at the very beginning. But also we need to differentiate which type of decisions we are making. On the one side, we have regulatory decisions that are related to granting the access to things that are, in principle, the balance between benefit and risk are much more in favor of benefits than risks, and that is regulation. And on the other side, the role that HTA bodies needs to play. It is true that we have followed in many cases what regulatory bodies have said, and in this sense. One of the things that we need to determine, and it is for the healthcare systems, it is where the challenges are, and perhaps the challenges are not at the same stage in all the indications, and this is the first thing. And the second thing is that probably we need to have accurate measures of which are the outcomes that will reflect better the value to the healthcare systems and the clients, finally the patients, in each occasion, and also in each context that could differ from healthcare system to healthcare system. So my answer would be that perhaps we need to focus more on where the unmet needs are, how can be better addressed, and how that could be reflected as outcomes.
Thank you, Iñaki. Katharini, from an industry point of view, when OS data is not available or limited at the time of initial PNR decision, should this itself prevent patient access? What should happen in that case?
So my answer is definitely no. So clearly, using overall survival as the gold standard to determine the value of the medicine may limit the speed and delay the patient access to potentially life-saving therapies. So we know very well that, as it was mentioned before, that the regulatory agencies have established frameworks for the evaluation and registration of medicines to support accelerated access. On the other hand, the payer and HTA bodies haven't adapted their processes to align with the early registration. So patients see innovation in the development of new medicines, and they see that regulatory agencies are creating faster pathways for getting these medicines to the market. But the HTAs haven't sort of evolved their processes of evaluating these medicines, and so they aren't getting to patients much faster. So there is a real opportunity to examine other endpoints that are relevant to reflect medicine value. And we believe that healthcare systems should adapt their assessment to incorporate other patient-centric outcomes in their medicine evaluation process. So endpoints other than OS, in combination with patient-reported outcomes, can provide the opportunity to address each of the challenges that are associated with the reliance on overall survival data. And having said that, I want to mention some examples. So in settings where time to demonstrate overall survival is extensive, so it may take more than 10 years to demonstrate, endpoints such as time to disease progression or improved patient response provide the opportunity to predict survival outcomes in a time frame that is more meaningful to patients. Then we can refer to early stage disease. So the use of endpoints can provide the opportunity for a more direct measure of efficacy of a treatment. And then we have cancers where survival outlook is, very, very high, and the disease is moving toward a chronic disease status, like breast cancer, for example, where extending survival is becoming less relevant as an end goal altogether. And then I really want to mention the patient-reported outcomes and the fact that they provide the opportunity to reflect the quality of patient survival and enable a more holistic assessment of the value of the new therapies. Last but not least, I want to refer to a factor that should be taken into consideration, and it is really important. So it is the opportunity that the patient has to benefit from future innovation if disease progression is slowed. So given the rapid rate of scientific advances across the different indications, delaying the potential metastatic or advanced cancer can provide to patients the chance to benefit from novel therapies and potential cures that are currently in development. So these are elements that should be considered.
Thank you, Katerini. Now, Peter, from the physician point of view, why do you think endpoints beyond OS should be used to make treatment decisions or inform treatment decisions? And then follow-on question, in which cancer types or stages do you think they have the most value?
Well, first of all, I think we have made tremendous progress in the last years, so that the so-called hard endpoints like overall survival have to be also complemented by other endpoints like progression-free survival, or in my view, mainly patient-reported outcomes, because cancer in many cases is turning into a chronic disease. I don't think that we have to take care of survival like in lung cancer. In my field, in GU oncology, you have more or less only bladder cancer or most advanced kidney cancer, where you're faced with survival issues within the next 2 years or so. Mostly, like in prostate cancer or testis cancer, patient-reported outcomes are more important than overall survival, especially for prostate cancer, which is a really chronic disease. And so, depending on the stage and treatment of cancer, I think it's important to realize our side effects of treatment that influence life of patients, and this has not been acknowledged in the past, at least to my mind. You usually have a publication on overall survival, and then a secondary publication on patient-reported outcomes within the same trial. But there are only a few trials that are powered on patient-reported outcomes. And to my mind, in especially prostate cancer, kidney cancer, testis cancer, we need trials that are powered on patient-reported outcomes. So a lot of things have changed in the last 10 years. And if you see, more than 50% of our patients will experience cancer as a chronic disease rather than a life-threatening disease. And I think this makes secondary endpoints, so-called secondary endpoints, or at least non-overall survival endpoints, of great value.
Thank you. Iñaki, we talked a little bit earlier about uncertainty. So what uncertainty related to endpoints beyond overall survival? What level of certainty do payers need to make their funding decision? And asking quite directly, what are they willing to pay for the value of hope, as we all know, and shown in the ISPOR Valley flower? What is your perspective on this?
Yeah, we pay for hope when we are desperate. And I don't think we are at that level. So it is true that one of the things that is important when promoting a kind of treatment or solution, it is obviously the value that that solution could bring to the system and obviously to the final client, and in this is the patient. So in this sense, the highest level of certainty is the desirable one. Can we live with the lowest level of certainty? Obviously, we need two in many senses, and that is related to the level of risk that we can admit, and also we introduce here another variable that is related to the level of investment that we can do as a system. We need to think about that. First of all, we have a limited budget on the one side, and we need to bring the highest level of value for that level of budget. In this sense, I think it is not just a matter of the certainty that we could have, that obviously it is, and that is related to the capacity that we need to define, first of all, the type of outcomes that will be of interest to the system and obviously to the patients and the professionals, and this is a matter of discussion. And on the other side, which is the value that those outcomes could bring on the one side, and on the other side, which is the cost. So once again, in terms of prioritizing the best available solution, it is a matter of outcomes and it is a matter of cost. And probably most of the decisions are based on those two sides. On the one side, it is the capacity that we have to assume the risks that we are taking when something is launched, and still there is not sufficient quality of information that supports the decision, and to which extent that risk aversion that we could have in terms of acknowledging that there is still uncertainty, it can be transferred in something that is attainable in how that is referred to the possible cost of the solutions. So I think this is part of the discussions that we need to have on the three sides: on the side of the system, on the side of the patients, and on the side of the companies, in which we discuss first of all the required outcomes on the one side, and based on the discussion that perhaps we need to have more with patients, professionals in terms of that, and perhaps in some cases, as Peter has referred to, we need to emphasize that perhaps the frontiers in many occasions and many indications, it is not overall survival, and there are other things that matter or should matter to the systems. But on the other side, it is to which extent, with that level of uncertainty, we need to pay what we are paying, and this is also a matter of negotiation, and obviously there are ways of avoiding at the very beginning the high prices that sometimes are asked for, and in this sense, I think some kind of managed entry agreements or other type of solutions that have been already discussed and in some occasions are put in place. Perhaps those are aspects that could help. Another thing that we need to use, it is currently the new insights that we have on methods, robust methods that are not just I would say randomized control trials, but other type of observational studies, but they need to be robust methods in terms of comparisons, and that could lead us to have more certainty with treatments allowed in place. So on the one side, once again, prices are important, and cost the systems are important. Certainty is important in the sense of what we are paying for. And finally, we need to ascertain that we can reach to other ways of measuring value, probably on the basis of observational studies, but probably with comparison and with robust methodology.
Thank you, Iñaki. So I'd like to conclude this first chapter, so to speak, on the value of endpoints with a question to Peter on how you see, to what extent you see greater recognition of endpoints beyond overall survival to contribute to innovation, medical innovation, and advancement in care for patients. I'll ask the same question afterwards to Bettina as well.
So you were asking whether this contributes?
Yes, how I can advance innovation and in the end improve patient outcomes.
If you don't test for patient outcomes, you're not able to improve it. So I think it's eminent that we concentrate on patient-reported outcomes. Let's take a classical bladder cancer chemotherapy that usually prolongs life in terms of many years, but it brings a lot of costs in terms of quality of life for patients, and harms and benefits always should be in a certain balance. And as a doctor, we tend to overestimate quality of life in patients under systemic treatment. And we need the honest and structured reply from patients in order to be able to really influence our future treatment decisions in drug development. let's take some, for example, elderly systemic treatments as an example. If we use cisplatin treatment that is used for many decades now, we don't ask patients about their sensitivity of the hearing loss and chronic renal failure 10 years after treatment. There are rarely data on this, and patients suffering from all this. And if we don't know about these negative effects and downsides of treatment, we never would be well inclined to develop low tox drugs. When we still stick with overall survival, then we have a lot of effects, but the toxicity of treatment, actually for the patients, it is more important sometimes than to survive 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 months longer. And as doctors, we don't take this into account. We are just relying on the drugs that are approved in terms of improvement of overall survival or cancer-specific survival, but we don't really realize how important side effects are for patients. And it certainly will influence our treatment decisions if we would have more data on this. And it's easy, you know, it's just easy. We have telephone actions that we ask our patients. I'm dealing a lot with testis cancer patients that certainly remember what has happened 20 years ago because they are long-term survivors of the disease. And then they have hearing loss and they have neuropathy and all this stuff, and no one really asked them. And still we're using cisplatin treatment for testis cancer because it was proven 50 years ago that's effective. So this is a rare cancer. No one really is interested. So there's no budget on this and no market. And that's why we stick with very old treatments that cause side effects. So your question, does it influence our future decisions? Obviously, yes. We strongly need those data.
Thank you. Bettina, same question to you from your perspective as a patient advocate. How do you think these endpoints contribute to innovation and advancement in care for patients?
So I think, the first thing I would say is that we all talk about endpoints as if we all meant the same thing. But I think we all approach them with a different interest and a different purpose. And I, for example, would make a difference, let's say, if you look into quality of life or PROMs and PREMs, and let's say a PFS or, I don't know, a pathological complete response. So for me, that's like they're different type of different things in terms of what they mean, how we collect them, and what people try to get out of them. So there's obviously, the point is very valid. If you don't measure, it doesn't exist in a way. So, and of course, we have been like quality of life is not only sometimes I think it is in certain circumstances it's hard to measure, then there's always this obvious time lag, and then there's always this trade-off. If you're suffering 10 years past treatment, how do you think about the treatment looking back? So we have a lot of these discussions right now, and I don't have an answer, but we have these discussions right now in the melanoma community where treatments are moving into earlier and earlier stages. And in stage 4, so I lost my husband to melanoma, and he was stage 4 right from the beginning. And at that point, treatment or no was no question really, because you know what is at stake, and you know we could see the tumor grow actually daily. So that it was just, that was never a question that we asked ourselves. Then if you move into a stage 3 or now even into a stage 2 setting, and even in a stage 2 setting, we know that most patients will actually be fine without any treatment. And then suddenly this trade-off becomes very different. So I think that is like for us, I would like to have this kind of the gift of hindsight to find a strategy that we anticipate toxicity. I think so that for me is like that we get better, and this is building on what Peter said, is I think this improving treatments as a holistic package is something that I think is really, really important. And something like, you know, I think it's not just measuring it. I think it's also looking for it, because you don't know what you don't know. A patient, if you ask a patient today who has just been diagnosed with a cancer, do you want treatment, yes or no? Most people will probably go for treatment because they don't know what they will have or face in 10 years. So I think that for me is an important piece to get to drugs that are better tolerated, and they should be part of the same package. So that's one part. The other thing is that I think is when I think of endpoints, and now I'm not just talking quality of life, but more the entire package. So if you take everything together, what I would like to see is that we combine them in a way that we optimize the risk-benefit trade-offs that every partner in this healthcare system actually faces. So you are, in certain situations, you're willing to accept a high level of risk. In other situations, you will accept a very low level of risk. So if you think, again, stage 4 patient with advancing disease, your willingness to accept risk is very high. If you think vaccine, you would rather be on the other end of the spectrum. So I think to get this type of, I think that endpoints and like more in addition to OS, if we take it as like a group, or like think of them as a system, they can help us to optimize our decisions wherever we are on this pathway, whether we are very risk accepting or rather very risk averse, and that this right combo can help us to develop drugs that are better tolerated, but also to optimize our decision making. Because I think of it as if we have a drug that could save lives and we're not able to get it to patients, we basically reduce the value of this innovation to our societies because we can't adopt it, if you want. The same goes in the reverse. If we hand things out that have, let's say, very high toxicity that then causes suffering or costs in following that, we're also not properly using it optimally for our society. So in my mind, it is like a system we have to think of, and we have to think of, instead of comparing one endpoint, do you prefer A or B, we have to think about how do we think about A and B, and how do we have to optimally use them and base decisions on the fact how we use them. Sorry for the long one, because it's in my head, it's a bit clearer, but I think it is about optimizing across the entire space and not just like picking one out of an entire thing that is way complexer.
Thank you. So this has been very rich discussion. Thank you very much on the value of these endpoints. What I would like to move on to now, and we will get back to your point, Bettina, on actions and what to do at the end as well. But what I would like to insert here now is first of all, a perspective on barriers to their acceptance. So barriers to the acceptance of endpoints beyond OS, including patient-reported outcomes, and like to explore these in a bit more detail. Starting with a payer perspective, Iñaki, from your point of view, where does the uncertainty stem from regarding the use of endpoints beyond OS in the HTA decision-making process?
First of all, is trust. And I think one of the main challenges that we have it is that currently, and I'm following the regulatory aspects. Most of the trials are not sufficiently designed in terms of capturing the value of endpoints that are not overall survival, and that is one of the main challenges. So first of all, most of the trials use overall survival as a primary endpoint, and they are designed for determining the value on that basis. So probably we do need to revert the design and harmonize probably the processes between regulatory and HTA decision making, and in this sense probably to define the designs that are required in a better way. The second thing it is how those outcomes are obtained. And I think it is one of the challenges, especially when we need to devote something that has been performed for, I would say, high internal validity. That is a randomized control trial in which the patients are carefully selected, and that needs to be transferred to patients that are not of the same characteristics. And it is the same indication probably, but are not patients with the same characteristics. Probably the patients that we are treating, they are more comorbidities, they are not of the same ages, and many other things that creates a big problem for the systems when you need to translate that in reality. To whom they are those outcomes obtained, I think it is crucial, and in this sense, it is the external validity that is crucial for systems in terms of determining the final value by which we are paying as payer. It is also important, and also the robustness. And I think if we are not based on on trials, the problem could be something that it could be related to biases, and in this sense, we need to be very careful. Following the argument that has been used by Bettina, it is true that one of the things that we need to determine, and we are not determining at this stage, it is which is the level of risk that we are accepting for each indication. And I think that will be crystal crucial in terms of determining which are the outcomes and the differences that we are going to admit to finally accept for reimbursement those treatments. And this is something that we need to surpass in order to reduce the barriers to the acceptance of those outcomes that are not overall survival. So I think there is a need for I would say a crucial analysis of each indications, where the barriers and where the challenges, and what is the admissible or the acceptable risk that we can afford on the one side, and on the other side, which is the frontier. So as Peter has said before, not in all the indications that we have the frontier at the same stage. In some cases, we still have overall survival as the frontier. So we need to increase the level of survival of the patient. In some other occasions, it is improving the toxicity of existing treatments. In some other occasions, it is improving the quality of life overall. Overall, it would be desirable all of those, but still in some indications the frontiers are different. So I think we as payers, or those that we are informing payers, and those regulators need to define well and share with patients and with the community, and obviously with companies, where the frontiers are for each indication, and probably that will enable and also make easier the roadmap that we need to follow.
Thank you. Picking up on this point on validation, I guess, of tools and methodologies used to measure the endpoints. Peter, from your point of view, to what extent do you see barriers here in terms of how well validated the tools and methodologies are? And I know this is a general question. I'm sure there are differences by endpoint, but if you could share your perspective here on where you see particular challenges.
Yes, obvious. As compared to the classical endpoints, if someone is dead, it's completely clear that the endpoint is reached, and even progression-free survival is clearly easy to define. But it starts with toxicity. So we all used to CTC classifications, and then no one looks at grade 1 or grade 2 toxicities and ask patients what this means for them. So a drug is reported with the whatever 30% grade 1, 2 toxicity, and as a doctor you say, well, okay, that's easy. There's not a toxicity we really have to talk about. But if you ask patients what a grade 2 toxicity, for example, neuropathy or hearing loss, means for them in terms of changing their profession and not changing their life, actually sometimes, there's a discrepant endpoint evaluation on this. And that is the point where we have to discuss, because the patient-reported outcomes are hard to really structure, to be quantified, and it is possible, but you need a certain number of patients that are asked and a really structural evaluation of this. And we are not used to this in the drug approval processes. We are used to the classical endpoints and then the toxicities. But this does not resemble what patients feel about this. And I think there's a lot to do in terms of methodology in how to report patient-reported outcomes. And some were asked, of the audience were asking, is this influencing already, or should it influence the approval process? Yes, it should. But then before it does, I think we need a really good methodology in terms of comparability of patient-reported outcomes in different diseases and stages.
Thank you. And turning over to Katerini, from your point of view and of the industry point of view, where do you see the main challenges with generating the evidence that's required to demonstrate the value of these endpoints?
So an important challenge that the industry is facing with generating evidence relates to the variation in acceptance of different endpoints between payers. Already, Inaki and Bettina has provided the fact that there are different definitions and different guidelines. So specific criteria, guidelines, and frameworks relating to the use of other non-OS endpoints, by HTA and payer bodies today are largely lacking. Criteria for the acceptance of different endpoints are not clearly defined at the country level, and we can say they are heterogeneous across different EU, but also international markets. So this clearly results in a different set of expectations for manufacturers from each payer body. So one endpoint might be acceptable for an HTA body in one country, the same might be rejected by another country. So it becomes critical to have more detailed and prescriptive guidelines for the consistent qualification and incorporation of the endpoint evidence in the decision processes where mortality data are lacking. So there is a part that has to do with harmonization here, harmonize the criteria and increase transparency on the evidence requirements to support reimbursement per cancer type and stage. And this is really, really critical. And having said that, it is important to mention that once the required evidence has been delivered to payer bodies and HTAs, it is critical this to be recognized by the value frameworks and be using it. Thinking of another challenge, I can mention the difficulty of conducting meta-analysis of patient-level data across multiple clinical trials. So while meta-analysis of randomized control trials is considered the best approach to assess the endpoints and correlation with OS, this is not always possible. And, there are issues like small trial numbers for the meta-analysis, lack of consistency, it was mentioned before, in trial design and treatment approaches. So you may have potentially different dose, you may have different combinations or different target populations. So this is also an issue. Inconsistent definitions of endpoints that it was mentioned before, and then inconsistent measurements of surrogate across trials can really reduce the quality of data obtained and can make it harder to detect statistically significant, correlations, and this is an issue. Thank you.
Thank you. So you've already hinted at what can be done, which is actually the third topic. What actions can be taken to address the concerns we just raised around endpoints beyond OS? And actually, Akademi, if you don't mind, I'd like to stay with you and sort of pick up on what you said. Can you outline, particularly from an industry point of view, where you see the key actions that should be taken to address these concerns? Anything you wanted to add on that?
Okay, key actions around the consensus.
Improve the acceptance.
Okay, so I think that it is important to start by thinking, which outcomes are most important to patients per cancer type and stage, and are the stakeholder groups aligned on which outcomes are most important, and are outcomes of importance being captured with OS in a certain treatment setting, and if there is a need for other endpoints beyond OS. So as I'm thinking, I would divide the key action into three main areas, three main strategic imperatives, if I can say. So it is really important to enable a better understanding of the applications and limitations of endpoints in oncology across all stakeholder groups in order to build confidence for their acceptance and use in the future. So as we mentioned, there is a lack of consensus across stakeholders and geographies around the value of endpoints and PROs. So clearly, the increasing number of endpoints create challenges, especially for the access stakeholders that may not have either the scientific or the clinical background. So through the research and the work that you announced also, Verena, at the early of the webinar, it is mentioned that FPA has made, it is mentioned that there is a lack of awareness. We saw that a lack of awareness or familiarity correlates sometimes with lack of acceptance stakeholders, want and they need to see data showing this correlation of endpoints with OS. And obviously, we can understand that we have gone from, the endpoints are many. We have gone from time to progression-free survival, disease-free survival, EFS, and so on and so forth. So to improve patient access to new and promising therapies, it is critically important to drive better awareness that will also build more trust with the use of endpoints, but also promote the education in this area. So continuous education for all on this topic, for industry, for patient organizations, HTA bodies, payers, regulators on the different endpoints, and meaningful measures so that we can ensure alignment during discussions. Then the second area as an action that I would think of is ensuring patient outcomes-driven regulatory and HTA evaluations of novel oncology therapies. So greater emphasis on the perspective of the patients. And I'm sure that Bettina will agree with me. The patient voice is not always accounted for in HTA evaluations. And the patient experience is crucial to the discussions of clinical benefit, as these are the people who stand to benefit or lose the most from, how well the HTA ecosystem adapts to new challenges. And then the third theme that I would consider is how can we address the payer concerns relating to the value derived from endpoints and PROs. And I think that Inaki already mentioned that, there is alternative contracting solutions such as outcome-based agreements that might be considered to balance the payer concerns. These can be useful access tools in cases where either the magnitude or the durability of the clinical benefits may, to some extent, be unclear. Then there is the use of conditional access, to accelerate access whilst generating evidence to reassure payers that price actually reflects the long-term benefit and value. And then the early engagement with stakeholders to gain buy-in to the trial design and approach. So these are the elements that I would say are three key actions that are not difficult to be applied and can actually give some good solution to the issue.
Thank you. I'd like to pick on one point here that was also brought up in a question from the audience, and this is going to Bettina. To what extent can patients be involved, or should patients be involved in the HTA process? So what is the current sort of degree of involvement? Obviously varies by country. And then how can that potentially be adapted, changed to ensure that patients are getting a better voice?
Well, you kind of already answered your question. So that obviously we have numerous HTA bodies. Some countries have more than one, and the degree of involvement obviously varies. So I think something that I personally always find a bit problematic with this kind of structured involvement is that it's usually the agency reaching out at a very well-defined point when they would like to have a certain answer on a certain topic that they have predefined, often also with a predefined tool. And from our perspective as patient advocates, that's not necessarily the point where we would like to be in the process. So I think that is the biggest issue in engagement, because engagement is often just driven by one side, and it's not necessarily the meaningful place for us. Having said that, there are numerous initiatives where one as patient community can influence how discussions go, just like very much here in a webinar, so where it is about developing concepts. And what many patient organizations or communities are now doing is generating their own evidence, which then kind of provides something like a backdrop against which decisions can be made, especially if you move into a new indication or a new stage of disease that is not so well studied. We don't know what matters to people or what is important or what the trade-offs are. And I think any evidence we can generate in that setting and share, like publish and share with the wider community, does influence decisions in the end, because it kind of gives a clearer picture of the need, of the preferences, and how decisions are made. And I think that is valuable for for everyone, for every stakeholder in the process. And it's actually going back to the previous question round. I think something when it comes specifically to quality of life or PROs and PREMs in general, something what I think we often miss is these sufficient granularity within our patient populations, because when it comes to preferences, we are different. So there is always a natural distribution in our patient populations. It's not that everyone agrees on the same thing. What matters to one might not be relevant to someone else. For example, and that was already mentioned earlier on, if it affects your job, you know, if you have like a computer job, you can come, the kind of you are like, you know, you can't walk that well, it will not kind of affect you. It will maybe annoy you. It will affect your private life and your life outside, but it will probably not affect your job as much as when you had a job where, you know, walking is part of your routine. So I think it's these type of preferences. This was now like a quite stupid one, but I think I'm just intrigued that if you give a patient population the same question, people will fall into different groups. And if we don't get that right, we miss an important part. So we ask people about their preferences, but then we all mesh it up and say everyone is the same. So we lost the value that we had in there. So I think that is something else where our communities are important, because I think we can pick this up and we should highlight it. And yet again, that is contributing to the overall understanding of the situation. I actually personally think, and I know that many of my colleagues don't agree with me in that one, but I think that that is actually the space where we can have the biggest impact and where we can have the biggest contribution to the future our communities face, rather than having this one one very predefined area where you can, you know, fill in a form that gives you very limited options, and definitely no free text, because who's going to value that? So I think that is something where we have a space and can make a real difference.
Thank you. And then asking a related or similar question to Peter, how do you see physicians getting involved in addressing some of the barriers that we've mentioned, the uncertainty that comes with endpoints beyond overall survival? Where do you see a role here?
I think it's a very important role, and I don't think that you have to explain to physicians that this is an important goal of a trial. I've experienced in the last 5 years, at least in Germany where I'm working, that the governmental funding institutions, they embark on trials that are focused on patient-reported outcomes in cancer. I think this is a positive development. I think it's a different issue in drug development and drug approval, because as we have also seen in the chat, there are some requirements on how to use patient-reported outcome data, and that this also needs to be well defined in the approval legislations and registration companies. So it's important that we have a definition what kind of patient-reported outcome really may influence the approval process. And this is far away from our clinical trials and research we're doing on an academic level. I think there it is not a big deal to start trials and get funding for trials with patient-reported outcome, as I said. But in the approval process of drugs, I think this is still a long way to go.
Thank you. And then Iñaki, we talked about the evidence that's required for, you know, to support the HTA decision making. Are there any areas where you think payers can be, you know, supporting clarity of what evidence is required, being more, you know, collaborative? Are there any ways, actions that the payer community can take to support this evidence generation?
Yeah, it is true that one of the things that we are not doing in general is producing evidence. What we are is judging evidence. Probably what can help it is defining the rules. So it is first of all, we are in a privileged position because probably we are in the middle of the process. So judging the evidence and informing decision makers on which are the I would say the solutions that they should follow, or at least which are the decisions that they should follow. In this sense, what we can do it is, first of all, it is generating a dialogue. So I think the proactive approaches that have been occurring in the last decade in different parts of the world. I can mention the scientific consultations that are nowadays being supported in Europe, and I think that could be one of the ways. Or the early dialogues that have been supported, and nowadays it is a practice in Canada. I think it is another way. Obviously, in the UK, the META project that is nowadays followed by NICE in terms of determining a dialogue between companies and decision makers. In this sense, our role should be generating the dialogue, so defining the outcomes in collaboration with patients and professionals and managers. I think they are the three voices that we need to hear, which the outcomes of interest for each indication should be, and for that we need to define for each indication what is the frontier, and then how we can ascertain and provide certainties to the systems around the value for those outcomes that have been defined. In this sense, I think we can help in determining which would be the acceptable designs, and which will be the time frames by which those outcomes will generate sufficient certainty around their value, and finally. I think we need to crucially advocate for a much more harmonized process in the generation of evidence in the interface between regulatory and final decision making. So probably that will help in the sense that we are not going to duplicate the effort in the generation of evidence. And I think probably I don't think the regulation it is at the end of a stage, and the HT regulation in Europe it is at the end of stage, but at least the paths and I would say the steps that nowadays we are following. Probably that will help in this sense. So probably more joint scientific consultations between regulatory and HTA bodies, much more harmonized processes in the definition of outcomes that will help.
Thank you. That was actually also one of the questions from the audience, so thank you for already addressing that. So that's been a very rich discussion. I would like to conclude with an outlook on what each of the speakers consider to be their key messages from the perspective of their stakeholder groups on this topic, and would like to start with Bettina. A brief closing statement from you, please.
I believe that like alternative endpoints, if you want to call them, are here to stay. But I also agree with what Iñaki just said, is that we will have to work on mutually agreement to make them work for us.
Thank you. Peter, over to you.
Yeah, I only can echo this. I think we need a better definition what kind of patient-reported outcome data we need for drug approval processes. There have been many publications on this, but I think the authorities need to define and structure this way in order to enhance also companies to put this into their primary endpoint discussions.
Thank you. Iñaki, do you like to share yours?
I would echo what Bettina said, but also focus on three main aspects. On the one side, dialogue. So there's dialogue in terms of hearing what the patients, the professionals, and the managers are willing to have, and that is first. Second, the frontiers for each indication. So it is to define that means that we are not doing one fits all. So in principle, it is what we are doing right now, and I think we need to work together in the definition of where currently is the unmet need for each indication, and probably that will reflect which the outcomes that we should look at will be. And finally, new ways of demonstrating causality. We are talking about certainty and uncertainty, and that it relates to which extent we are comfortable with the linkage between the results that we have and which is the responsible of those results. And I think there are epidemiologists have done a great work in demonstrating that even with observational data, we can have causality. But obviously, we need robust designs once again. So it is not that we can promote a cohort study and with this it is sufficient, or we can develop a registry and with that is sufficient. I'm not on that. I think that probably we can demonstrate that, but once again, we need robust designs and very careful collection of data, and the frontier will be data and data correction.
Thank you. Katerini, over to you.
Thank you. So I agree with the other stakeholders. So one size may not fit all, and new approaches may be needed to ensure patient gets access to life-extended or life-improving drugs in a timely way. So clearly there is a need, as I said before, to enable better understanding of the applications and the limitations of endpoint across all the stakeholder groups. And the nature of innovation means that the regulatory evaluations, industry evidence generation, HTA processes, and choice of therapy for patients and physicians will need to adapt. So as such, stakeholders across the entire value chain must reflect on their role. We must reflect on our role in defining value and acknowledge the true value of innovation as a function of alternative outcomes, and characterize the value and limitation of the evidence to support such outcomes. So it's clear that how value is measured can be complex and definitely cannot be defined only by overall survival.
Thank you, Katerini, and thank you to all of our speakers. We're now at time. I really appreciate your participation, and also for the big audience for joining us and for all your questions. Sorry we couldn't get to answering all of them. I wish you a pleasant rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.